Thank you,
Sprinting.
Madam Speaker. Running across the chamber to get back to my spot. Yes, I love a good run. I love the Palmerston markets, but I will be looking forward to when I get my Friday nights back and I can join the Palmerston Park Run on Saturday mornings again. Because you have to be there at 6:45. When you leave the markets at 9:30, it's a bit of an early morning. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the first homeowner grant extension. This is a fantastic policy from this government to kick-start the Territory economy after 8 long years of Labor's mismanagement. I do thank the loyal opposition for supporting this bill. It appears that in opposition they have discovered some common sense which unfortunately was lacking when they were in government. I just want to respond to a few comments before I move on. The member for Johnston raised some questions about whether it would increase supply. And I'd like to quote earlier Hansard, where the member for Johnston said that private investment has never played a major role in the NT economy and the standard of living for most Territorians, and it never will. So I think we can see what the member for Johnston thinks about private sector investment in the Territory. On this side of the House, we believe in private sector investment and we believe in small business getting a start, getting ahead, growing the economy, like AKJ Services, which are developing a new land release in the area of Holtsey, which I believe the Minister for Infrastructure and the Attorney General were out there just the other day announcing the naming of a new suburb, the suburb of Ash, after Dr. Valerie Ash, an outstanding Territorian. And that development is being built by AKJ Services, which are a fantastic local Larrakia-led corporation, a company that's really taken that development with both hands and is really getting into it. So I invite the member for Johnston to come out to Palmerston and have a look at that land release, that development, where there's machinery running around like crazy. They're doing all the earthworks. They're putting in all what they call it the headworks so they can get cracking on a new development. How many lots are in that development, Minister for Infrastructure? There's like a couple of hundred? In excess of 400. 400! So this is a new development which has been turbocharged over the last year by this government's approach to supporting private industry and small business. And I'll get to how we leverage the private sector a bit more later on. And I just want to mention, pick up on the member for Drysdale's comments about increasing supply. So we've heard in this chamber before about the rental problems of the member for Nightcliff and the troubles that she's had in that area. And I would suggest that the best solution for rental affordability is more supply in the market. More supply in the market. The more houses we have, the more it's simple supply and demand. The more supply we have, the more people will be able to move out of rental properties into their own homes, bringing supply onto the market, increasing competition for rental properties, increasing affordability. So that is a great thing. And in fact, I encourage the member for Nightcliff to take up our first homeowner grant and purchase a property in the NT. Put down roots, in fact. Become a homeowner here in the Territory. What a thing. I'm a homeowner here. I own my house in Palmerston. That's where I'm raising my kids. My kids go to the school in the local suburb. I think it's a great thing. Not all of us are born and bred. Some of us have immigrated here from other places in the country, and I think to put down roots and really commit to the Territory shows a great commitment to the Territory and its future. That we're planning on being here for more than just the length of this term. So I encourage the member for Nightcliff to take up the first homeowners grant. There's a lot of great properties coming onto the market out in Palmerston, actually, or maybe the rural area. in God's own country, as the member for Goyder does call it. So the first homeowners grant amends the previous bill that we passed on coming to government to extend the $50,000 homegrown territory grant for 12 months. And this is following a comprehensive 6-month review which did say that it has been a success, as we can see over in Holtsey. In fact, there's a quote that I missed here. The Minister for Logistics and Infrastructure on September 13th was quoted in the NT News as saying, "The government's homegrown territory grants have been a key driver of land releases in the NT." And that's in a story about that Holtsey land release, which is really going gangbusters. Myself, the member for Spillett, the member for Drysdale, were out there and visited that land development a couple of months ago, and I tell you what, you had to watch your step because there were machines going everywhere. That place was really cracking, and I'm looking forward to seeing those houses start to spring up. I've got people in my family who got their start in the construction industry, you know, block layers and sparkies. A member of my family who started off in his working career as a block layer was building homes around Palmerston in the last building boom we had, which was unfortunately 10 years ago or more under the previous CLP government. What a funny coincidence, you know, when there's a housing boom and houses are sprouting up like mushrooms everywhere, it's usually under a CLP government, and I'll get to that in a bit. So the previous grant was so well picked up and so popular, we've needed to extend it for another 12 months. In my own electorate of Blaine, now unfortunately, I don't have a lot of land for fresh land releases, unlike some other members in this House. So most of the opportunities in my electorate are for established homes. So we had the biggest pickup in Blaine was the $10,000 first homeowner grant for established properties. So 15 people used that grant to buy a home in Bellamac. 8 people used that grant to buy a home in Malden. 15 people used that grant to buy a home in Woodruff. Woodruff, a fantastic established suburb in Palmerston. We've got great water pressure. We've got beautiful open parks, large lot sizes, and after 8 years of Labor's mismanagement, house prices have been depressed, so it's a great place to pick up a bargain, get in there, renovate, build the house, build your dream home. We had 2 people pick up the $50,000 first homeowner grant for a new build. They were both in Bellamac. So there's not much land left in there, so if you want to get into Bellamac, you better get in there because all the blocks are just about gone. So 40 people, 40 families. And I just want to pause there. It's not, we look at statistics all the time and we look at numbers, but that number 40 represents 40 families. That's husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, kids, sometimes other generations. You know, they might have grandma there as well, helping to look after the kids. That's 40 families who've put down roots in just my electorate alone. I believe that over 1,000 families have taken up the grant scheme altogether in the last year. Over 1,000. That's 1,000 families who put down roots into the territory, unlike the member for Nightcliff, although I really hope she does use this grant to buy a house. And they've committed to the territory. They're really putting down their roots. You know, they're going to send their kids to the local schools. They are here for the long haul. And that's why I support this bill. I still recall in my first campaign in 2020, after a mere 4 years of Labor government, door knocking around Palmerston, and I was becoming despondent, Madam Speaker, by the number of empty houses that I was coming across. This is in my own area of Palmerston, door knocking, and regularly there would be a house that was just empty. And you could see, you would go up and try to knock on the door, and you could see that, through the windows, the entire place had been cleaned out, the owners had moved out, and it was just sitting there vacant, unwanted, because no one wanted to be in the territory when it was run by Labor. Business didn't want to be here. Business was going down the drain. They came to government, and the first thing they did was take the best chance for economic development for the Northern Territory to be the powerhouse, the fuel supplier of the country, the Beetaloo Basin, and they knocked it on the head. They brought in a moratorium, as Labor loves to do, and they killed the entire supply chain. Because it's not just one industry that you stop. When you bring in an industry is not composed of one business. I've talked on this before, and I'll take a brief detour into this again, because it's really, really important for those opposite to understand that when you stop an industry, you don't just stop the bit that you see. There is an entire supply chain. When they brought in that moratorium on the gas industry when they came to government in 2016, that stopped the entire supply chain. So yes, there were people exploring in the Beetaloo, but there were also trucking companies. There was gas fitting supply companies up here in Darwin. There were trucking companies that were moving all those parts, hundreds and hundreds of tons of steel, moving them down to the Beetaloo. All those people were going into the local sector. They were buying fuel and supplies and fixing their trucks and putting new tyres on their trucks. They were bookmaking, hiring accountants, all kinds of things. And then when that moratorium came in, I remember a couple of years ago talking to one of the small business owners who actually lost his business as a direct result of that moratorium. And he said it was just heartbreaking. In one fell swoop, not only did his business lose its future, but also he had to let go all of his subcontractors. So he had a team of subcontractors who were trucking all the gas fittings out to the Beetaloo, and he had to go and say to them, look, sorry guys, the government's killed our industry, so we're out of business, and so are you. And these guys had mortgages, homes, they had families, and that all contributed to people adding up the calculus and starting to lose faith in the territory under the previous government. But that will not happen on this side of the House. On this side of the House, we understand that the private sector is not just figures on a sheet, it's families. It's mothers, it's fathers, it's income earners, it's people bringing home the bacon, paying for their family, supporting their kids through school. When you kill an industry, you're actually taking away people's livelihoods. It's a great headline, opposing gas, shutting down the gas industry. You call it a moratorium and you say, oh, it's only temporary. But businesses, they're not funded by taxpayer dollars. They're funded in the private sector. They have to actually engage in business in order to stay afloat. So you call it a moratorium, but it'd be like taking a moratorium from oxygen. How many of us could survive a moratorium of oxygen? Not very long. That's why it's so important that government can't just come in with a heavy hand of legislation and just put an end to an industry. That's why I became politically conscious, when the live export ban, another Labor government killing an industry, and they didn't like one part of the industry, and they took out the entire supply chain, from the ships that transported cattle to customers overseas, all the supply agents along the chain, all the way to the cattle stations, right throughout the territory, the Barkly, Central Australia, all the agribusiness suppliers, Nutrient Ag, Territory Rural as it was at the time, all of the entire supply chain back through the entire Northern Australia that feeds that supports that industry. And it was just shut down overnight without a single care for all those families. There's a million other things they could have done, and in that particular case, I believe it was found to be unlawful in the High Court, and those farmers are still waiting on compensation from the federal government for that. So that'd be great if the member for Lingiari could get in her government's ear and just say, look, let's give these farmers what they're owed. They've been waiting a long time. They're not all here with us today. We've lost a few along the way. But coming back to housing, when I remember back in 2014, Palmerston was absolutely cranking. You could not hire building equipment on the weekend for love nor money. You'd go to Kennards, you'd go to all the local tradie suppliers, and if you hadn't booked it days in advance, good luck. Saturday morning was just absolutely flat out with all the tradies in there picking up their gear to work on their weekend jobs. It was cranking. One of my family members got his first job laying bricks. He started out as a block layer under the housing boom under the previous CLP government, and he built quite a number of houses around Palmerston, and that got his start, and he's now doing quite well. He's the 2IC in a local well-known construction company. There's a house in my... I just want to paint a picture of comparison. There's a house in my electorate of Blaine, and I won't give the address, but it sold in 2006 for $265,000. In 2024, after 18 years, 14 of those under Labor government, it sold again. And at the end of 8 long years of the previous government, it sold for $290,000. So that house, in 18 years, gained $25,000. So it was flat out, didn't even make 10% growth in 18 years. That poor homeowner, they poured their life, and I remember door knocking that house. They poured their heart and soul into that house. That was their family home, and that was their, as we do, we consider that our nest egg. We have equity in our home, with the thought that, all right, over time, that nest egg will grow, and we'll be able to, upsize, downsize, right size, move out rural. There's an expectation that investment in your home would grow over time. $25,000 over 18 years. Now, if you dug into that, in 2016 it was probably worth quite a bit more, but then over those 8 years it dropped back down, and that was the result. I really hope that after 8 years of this government, if that house sells again, that they would have doubled in value. In fact, I want to gentrify the older established suburbs of Palmerston. In some of the older areas of Palmerston have not the best name around the place. I would love to change that. As we work on our housing reform, as we work on our law and order agenda, as we make people feel safe in their homes and their communities, I look forward to the days when the large lot sizes in Palmerston become highly sought after for raising families. I think Palmerston is a great place to raise a family. We've got fantastic local schools, principals who are just doing an absolutely amazing job, recruiting the best teachers around. We've got a lot of fantastic parks. We have a full deck of programs over the dry season run by Palmerston City Council. It's just a great place to raise kids. So I want to see, as As development moves further out, I think Palmerston is a great place for people to invest. Get in there now. As I'm running out of time, I'd just quickly like to comment on some of the changes that I've heard over since we've come to power. So within 6 weeks after we came to government, Madam Speaker, I started hearing whispers from people that that had their house on the market and withdrawn it due to lack of interest and low offers. And Madam Speaker, these people were getting they'd taken their house off the market and they were getting calls from investors down south looking to see if they were still interested in selling. And they were astounded, Madam Speaker, and quite interested. And that only grew. In fact, earlier this year, I had a local real estate company canvassing in the Oasis Shopping Centre where my electorate office is. They were hunting on behalf of southern investors looking for properties. They were handing out, saying, if you've got a house in Palmerston, if you're interested in selling, we would love to buy. So I think that's just a great vote of confidence. Where was that in the last 8 years under the previous government? We never had southern investors, knocking on people's doors, asking if people were interested in selling, because what that says is that it's a vote of confidence. And part of that is the first homeowners grant scheme that this government brought to this House as an election commitment to jumpstart the economy. Now, it's not the full picture. We've got a full slate of other economic drivers. The Territory Coordinator, which I must say those opposite opposed tooth and nail. We were here till 3 a.m. in the morning, but we delivered that piece of legislation. 1 a.m. Sorry, I withdraw. 1 a.m. Thank you, Opposition Leader. 1 a.m. we were here until delivering the Territory Coordinator.
Silence, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have a full slate of economic agenda to deliver for Territorians, and the interests from southern investors who for 8 years have regarded the Northern Territory as the leper among the Australian states and territories, as the poor man. Suddenly, there's new management in town and they're interested because they know that we value small business, families and Territorians. And so we are putting forward a case to drive economic development in the Territory, and there's leads and lags. Some policies take longer to have an effect, others have a shorter timeline to effect. And the first homeowner scheme is one of those, it's a shot in the arm to really stimulate supply, kickstart things. If anyone's ever hopped on a dirt bike and sometimes you've got to give it a bit of a kickstart when it's been sitting around in the shed for a while and, there's cobwebs been growing on it, it's been neglected and a bit run down. You've got to hop on it and give that pedal a bit of a kickstart and then it roars into life. There's nothing wrong with the bike. There's nothing wrong with the Territory. What the Territory had for 8 years was simply bad government. We have faith in the Territory. Australia has faith in the Territory because of the CLP government who have brought in a raft of changes. And I'd like to talk about the character of the first home owner grant scheme because it's something that's really in the DNA of the CLP. Under the previous government, we saw government funding schemes 100%, like the State Square art building, like that. We all love art. We all love art. Come and visit my electorate office. Those opposite, please come and visit my electorate office. I have art all over the walls of my office, donated by the community, produced by the students in my community, Woodruff Primary School, Maldon Primary School, Rosebery Primary School, Forest Parade School, all those, Palmerston College SEC, the students who are here today, they've all created art with their own, their creativity, and they've donated it to my office, and we have it hanging there on the walls. I love art, but do we need to spend, $140 million on a building for that? Is that a good expenditure of taxpayers' dollars when we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough teachers, fundamental things that Territorians need. But in the DNA of the CLP, rather than fully government funding white elephant projects, we believe in unlocking the power of the private sector. And you see that in public-private partnerships. So this scheme is a classic example. So for a modest investment, you can unlock a huge amount of investment. So for a first homeowner grant of new build, $50,000, you can generate, I haven't built a house yet, so I don't know how much a new house build costs, but I imagine that it would be, upwards of $600,000 home and land package, probably $650,000. Thank you, Member for Catherine, $650,000. So that's at least a 10x. A 10x. That's amazing. If you told me that I could invest in something and I'd make 10x within a year, mate, I'd be right there. So that's what we're doing. We're outlaying a grant that unlocks investment in the private sector and, moreover, helps Territorian families get their start in life. And that's something that over time the CLP and the CLP in government has always done. I love talking about the railway because the Alice to Darwin Railway was really... Sorry? Oh, member for Fanny Bay worked on that. I would love to hear that story later. The previous member for Blaine, Barry Coulter, that was his brainchild. He was bound and determined to build that railway. And did he, now the Territory could have, I think at the time it was about $1 billion in, late 90s money, plus or minus. So the Territory could have gone into debt for $1 billion and built that railway, but would that have been a good use of taxpayer funds? Well, when there was another alternative on the table, which was to go into a public-private partnership. So the NT government, under, with I believe he was a treasurer at the time, Barry Coulter, ran around and they managed to get 30-30-30 investment. So the NT government chipped in a third, I think the feds chipped in a third, and they got a private consortium to chip in a third. So the NT government got an entire railway for 30 cents on the dollar, which is a pretty good deal from what I can see. And that's a philosophical difference that I think you'll see from those on this side of the chamber compared to those on the opposite side of the chamber. We on this side believe in the private sector and unlocking small business, unlocking the private sector, getting jobs going and helping people get started and building faith in the Territory. So, Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.